Hi, everyone. My name is Deepak Alwani. Um, I'm part of this great group. We've been doing this for about 7 years. Um, so thank you for attending today. We appreciate everyone taking the time to come and share your experience with us. So this event that I'm part of, it's brought to you by Business and Technology of Greater New York. The purpose of the event is to engage business and technology leaders of Greater New York to discuss their management and technology best practices and opportunities. In addition to myself and Bruno being founders, we've got organizers, including myself and Bruno, as well as David Simpson and Arwen Yip. Meanwhile, it is sponsored today by X Matters, Brooklyn Winery, and Elementary Brewing. Uh, we'd love to take questions during the event to make it more interactive. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask our guests, please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll address them live immediately following the fireside chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Arwen Yip, one of the co-organizers. Arwen? I think you may be on mute.
That happens.
There you go. At least I'm not a cat.
Yes.
Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Again, my name is Arwen, and I am part of this illustrious group, BTGNY. And we have a great event and a guest here. His name is Todd Unger. He is the Experience Officer and SVP Marketing and Member Experience at the American Medical Association, also known as AMA. He's also known as the quote unquote productive disruptor, and he's been also called the Renaissance Man. So without further ado, I want to introduce Todd Unger. And Todd, if you don't mind, just kind of give us a little bit of background and kind of talk a little bit about where you came from and how you got where you are.
Oh, thanks, Arwen. Everybody hear me all right?
Yeah, perfect.
So I appreciate you inviting me here tonight. I'm out of New York 13 years before I moved back here to Chicago for the last 4. So hi, New York. I've been at the AMA now for next week will be my 4th anniversary as Chief Experience Officer, and it's been an amazing 4 years that's brought together a lot of different chunks of my career. I started out in marketing at Procter & Gamble in Ohio, working on all sorts of stuff from antiperspirants to laxatives, you name it. And that's the, the beginning of my marketing career where I learned a lot. And I, following business school, then went into advertising, which is kind of an unusual path because I really wanted to, figure out how to combine creativity and business. And I worked at Leo Burnett in Detroit and Chicago for about 7 years before I went into the digital world with my first gig at AOL. My boss told me, "You're making the worst mistake of your life." That's what he told me. And then I went to AOL and spent 6 years there, and then a variety of different digital media type jobs in New York media. For about 13 years, everything from Lifetime Television to Time Inc. to some gaming startups, things like that. And then finally with the Daily Racing Form and horse racing for 6 years, my final 6 years in New York. And made a strange transition from a content standpoint to the AMA, but the job itself had a lot of similarities to many things that I've done here. And so excited to talk to you, tell you about what I'm doing and answer your questions.
That's awesome. I mean, it's amazing how diverse of a career and different types of business lines you've been through, and being gaming, AOL, to now kind of working with the medical profession. How do you encourage creative thinking within organizations? I mean, at the AMA, but also even in the past, and how has it kind of transitioned from digital and then to kind of digital and the medical field? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think especially in the kind of the field of experience or even marketing, you have to be a creative leader. And you have to build an organization and a team where, creative thinking that's supported by data is valued and taught, and part of the fabric of the organization.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people, they get to a certain level and you kind of wash your hands of like getting in there and doing that kind of work. For me, it's too important to experience, not to participate fully in that. And I roll up my sleeves in that. I was thinking, like, somebody asked me, like, why are you so involved in that? And I'm like, if I told you that you had a presentation tomorrow and 500,000 people were attending, would you be prepared and like get involved in that? Well, that's what it's like every time you send out an email or you put a video up. And you think about now content of all kinds, email, written articles, video, podcasts, it's all so essential to the experience. And it was so much for the AMA, where we kind of quickly realized people did not necessarily have a great idea of what we were doing on their behalf. And so for me, I take a great deal of direct interest in that. I've had to spend a lot of time teaching people how to do it. That art and science of writing in a marketing framework for email, how to produce video, what we need out of photography, how to put all those elements and package them together in a way that then can use to convert, to use the language of commerce today. And so that's been, pretty amazing experience for me. I love it, and so I'm very passionate about it. And your team kind of takes that on. And we've done so many new things this year, especially that people would never think the AMA could do. We began producing our own programs, like on top of just normal video production and things like that. We produced a medical student tribute to the graduating class of 2020, 30,000 young newly minted doctors, and we're going to have a graduation themselves. And would someone have ever said a year ago, hey, you're going to have this thing that's going to be headlined by Dr. Fauci, the cast of Scrubs, 3 Academy Award winners, and a list of about 30 other Hollywood celebrities with the most famous real doctors of America and the most famous TV doctors come together to say congratulations to these students? Like, nobody in their imagination would have thought we could have done that. And so that's my job, is to like say, why don't we try that?
Right.
And do it.
That's awesome. And so I guess that's where really your diverse background kind of came into play, where you took some of the experiences you've done at different industries and brought it kind of to the AMA, where maybe things weren't even thought about doing.
It's funny because I did learn, like, we started a video operation at the Daily Racing Forum and like a little, back room or something like that. But we were producing live programming every day. And that experience taught me, it's very doable. And so when we got here and we started the pandemic, there was a real need to hear from the leaders at the AMA. And I said, there's just no better way right now than we can do that with video. And I'm going to host this program. And we're going to bring on all our senior people at the AMA, the president of AMA, and then that morphed into like people from on the front lines across healthcare. And we're doing a daily show every day. And now that's in video on a podcast. And again, these weird experiences that you have along the way teach you that what's possible and then how to raise it to a new level.
Would you say they were pretty, when you brought up the idea, would you say they were pretty receptive, or they were about the idea?
I think a lot of times people are initially worried about whether you could pull it off or not. But I think we've gotten to a point now where we're sophisticated enough in terms of production that we have the infrastructure and the skill set to be able to do these things. It's really about the imagination and just the wherewithal to give it a try and know that, like, if the thing just falls flat, you stop doing it. It's not like the worst thing in the whole world. Right. And there was a point when we first started doing something like that where a colleague did say to me, and not in these words, like, the quality is bad.
Yeah.
And I'm like, listen, have you have you seen what other people are doing? I mean, on CNN, they're broadcasting out of somebody's basement. They're doing the same thing on the Washington Post. This is called broadcasting pandemic style, and we'll get better. And we did.
True. That's true. That's really interesting. You know, with the cat videos, and then with the BBC dads. I mean, I think it's definitely a lot more tolerant now. Can you tell us a little bit about like what are the core values and what is the vision of your company, and how do you and other leaders in your organization communicate them internally?
So I'll take that question and just give it a slightly different spin, because I think given what I've been working on, you walk into a place like the AMA, it's been around for 175 years.
Right.
And people kind of know that entity, and the mission is long established to promote the art and science of medicine and the betterment of public health. And so that's well known, and everyone at the organization can say that. But what I found when I arrived at the AMA and I began talking to a lot of people, members, non-members, the gamut, there was not a clear sense of what the organization did for them. And that's the difference between like a mission statement that your organizations have emblazoned somewhere in stone, and a brand strategy, which the difference between what you do and what you do for target audience. And that kind of language was not something that was kind of like in place before I got there. And so one of the key things that I started doing was to define what that brand strategy looked like. And so, after many rounds of research and talking to people, this idea that we coalesced around was the physician's powerful ally in patient care. And 4 ways that we do that, through speaking with a unified voice for physicians, by removing the obstacles that get between patients and physicians, by fighting chronic disease and public health care crises, and driving the future of medicine. And so that became kind of the framework through which we communicated what we do. And those buckets didn't necessarily exist before, but what we found in our research subsequent to that is that if I could just literally get everyone to say that main line and the 4 bullet points, it's 90% of the communication, and that it was meaningful and aspirational to people, and they got it, and it was important. And it resonates with physicians, because I don't know if you have any friends or family that are in medicine right now. There's no group of people who go through more on a daily basis to try to do that thing that they love, which is make people better. And they really need an ally right now. So it's a strategy that resonates with people. The framework itself is easy for people to understand. I've gone through this with every single person almost in our organization. I expect them to know when someone says, what's the AMA do, to be able just to say that. And we train people just to be able to talk about it. And then you can get down into the details and start talking to them about, what I would call proof points, which are like, what did you actually do? What's that support?
Yeah.
So before, I would say it was more like, there's a mission, and then let me tell you about 500 things we did. There wasn't that layer in there that spoke to people about what we do for them.
So I guess the first step really is to establish a core value, but I guess the second part of it, how do you essentially gauge that those values or activities are aligned to those values? You guys, like, how do you gauge that?
So we actually did it in a number of different ways, because then again, values, we have our own set of values, and I just want to distinguish between that are more internally focused for our organization. And when I'm talking about a brand strategy, I'm talking about communication.
Okay.
So I'm talking about going out and telling people, what's this organization do for you?
Right.
And so that framework, the great thing about digital media is you can actually be out in market and test that and see how people respond to it. And so we started with a marketing campaign that began to roll out proof to people, to tell them, here's the things we're doing for you and why it matters so much that we have your support. And we came back a year later and we looked at the approach that we took, and we went out and measured and did research to prove not only was that top level statement meaningful to people and very powerful in and of itself, but the 4 points underneath it made sense to people and they rolled up to the top level idea, and that all the proof points that sat underneath that made sense in that context, rolled up and supported the overall idea. And so the architecture of that communication has been proven both in market and through our research. And what we have found in addition to that then is, through all of those activities, which I call experience, that we can change people's minds. And that's what marketing's about. So it's not, as I say in my old organization, it relies on you to do great work.
Right.
I can't make it up.
Yeah.
So you keep doing great work and I'll keep telling people about it. That's my plan.
Awesome. So I'm curious. So the CXO role is a fairly new role, Chief Experience Officer. Are you the first CXO of AMA?
I am the first Chief Experience Officer, and it is it's in the scheme of things a relatively new role, and it's one that's, I think, evolving out there. And if you look at experience, kind of the history of experience, there's some that emanates out of design and I would say customer service. Those were kind of like the two. If you ask people, I'll get asked to speak at customer experience things, and they're like scratching their head. Why is this person here talking about digital? So I've had to kind of really figure out where are they coming from in their understanding experience. I took this job, and I'm not above actually looking online to figure out what it means to be a chief digital or chief experience officer. I did the same thing when I was a chief digital officer. It's like, what am I supposed to be doing? I Google it, and I start looking, and I could not find a definition that made sense in the world that I live in. And so on my 3rd anniversary at AMA, I made one up, and it is basically, it's the seamless integration of product and marketing and technology and commerce and service in to help acquire and keep customers. That's experience. It's not just making people feel good. All right. This is about growth. That's what this job is about. I was here to grow and accelerate membership and the engagement that we have with our audience. And I think what we learned along the way was that so many of these things, when you look at that kind of spectrum of things, that's a pretty weird span, right? And most organizations, and including when I arrived at the AMA, we had people, all over the place doing those things, and it needed to fit together. And so eventually, what my role oversees now is not only membership, but our digital publishing platforms, our marketing operation in total, and customer service. So it's I feel really lucky that you think about all the elements of experience to be able to kind of have a pretty good ability to affect all those levers, which I think it's a challenge. Like when you look around at experience in other organizations, it's so distributed, or there might be a standalone operation in charge of experience that's different from the marketing department, that's different from the commerce folks. And it's so hard to make those things work together.
Yeah.
So that's the big challenge. I think we're in an evolutionary period right now. I think that the demands of the digital age are going to ultimately change how companies are organized to be able to give somebody that span of the kind of control they need to really deliver on experience.
I mean, nowadays, can you really talk about customer experience without talking about digital, in your opinion?
I don't think that you can. It changed, it changed human behavior, and it changed a lot of other things. The first thing that it changed is the progression of people's interest, awareness of you, and interest in you. I mean, they used to, everybody's familiar with the funnel, right? So I call it's the tornado funnel, because people go from I need a thing to I got that thing in 5 seconds.
Right.
And so in the old days, like when you and I arrived like in business school, oh, it's the, awareness, interest, trial, repeat, all these sequential steps that people went through in customer creation and retention. Like that thing has just been obliterated, right? It happens too fast.
Yeah.
And so when you think about experience, it has to be at that place where it starts with marketing. Like, what is this thing? What is the product proposition? And you think about all of those little iterations along the way that it takes to deliver an almost instantaneous experience from I want that. I would say it's the Ariana Grande. I want it. I like it. I got it. It has to happen in like 10 seconds.
Right.
So that's experience.
Yeah, it's like this rapid development. It's not like going from A to Z and like A, B, C, D. It's like A to like P to Z, or even, yeah. So obviously, we're all, in a pandemic, and we talk about work from home and the cat video and things like that. How is your company and, AMA operating and functioning during this time of the pandemic? And you have a unique kind of also situation where, you're working with the frontline essential workers as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you can imagine that we all went to work from home like everybody else back in March, and I'll just tell you, like the combination of just like the new environment combined with, it's like, I guess the word I'm going to use is a crucible.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is just like this ultimate test of an organization of whether it can, in this situation, deliver to the people that really need it. And let me tell you, people really need it. You think about where we were back then, we were a month out of like, what is this thing's like in China? Is it going to get here? What is it? How do I treat it? Recognize it? Test? Like nothing answered.
Right.
And so, what we found in that period was, AMA is like a lot of different pieces. Some people are working on medical education. Some people are working on chronic diseases. Some people are working on physician wellness. We have a lot of different kind of, channels of operation, but COVID, presented us with kind of, this, unifying layer where we didn't change ultimately the things that we're working on, but we all put them geared toward helping people in this crisis. And so I go back to our brand strategy. We asked ourselves, what's it mean to be a physician's powerful ally in patient care in a pandemic? And for us, it meant being very explicit among the many things that we could do to say, here's what we are going to do. It's these three things. And we're going to make sure that people have the science they need to work with this. We're going to make sure that physician voices are front and center in this pandemic. And we're going to make sure that we do our best to, help patients in this thing.
Sure.
But our channel is, through those physicians. And so, you've never seen the AMA at the levels that you saw us last year. I mean, we're on CNN probably 5 times a day. I mean, it was just like everywhere. But, the key thing for us was that over the past several years, as we build out that digital platform that allowed us to really build audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have like this, the way that we have always gone about it through media, outside media, but now we have an owned audience. That we can use to generate. And so we had just, unprecedented reach, which is required because we were building a lot of things to help. Like you have things like telehealth, which went from like 0 to 100 miles an hour instantly. But, there's a lot in there to make that work, not just the technology part.
Yeah.
That's one piece. And then how do you do it? Who's going to pay for it?
Right.
What are the privacy issues involved? Like it's very complex in healthcare. And so we're working on all of these different pieces, and we have multiple constituencies. And so we have people in academic institutions. What about medical students and residents whose training has just been upended?
Right.
How do you teach in a virtual environment? How do you take care of chronic diseases? What happens when physician practices are closed? And so it was, it was our opportunity to step into that and make sure physician voices were front and center and they got what they needed to do their jobs.
So what would you say was the most challenging part of it? And then on the flip side, was there anything that kind of pleasantly surprised you and surpassed your expectations?
I'd say like just on the, I'm not surprised. I mean, we have a great team and we have a mission in place and we're all kind of headed down that way, but I've seen an organization turn on a dime like this and unify to the extent that we did and to see the results that came out of it.
Right.
So, I mean, I think the hard part is just, continuous uncertainty and the ability to all kind of stay in sync. I'm going to tell you, I found it easy. It's been easier to come together as an organization in this virtual environment. I feel like I talk to my peers and my team more than I ever have.
Interesting.
And I've it's been a surprising thing. I feel like we're closer for it.
Are you zoomed out?
I am like, it's so funny because like at the end of a day, we'll have like, I'm like on Zoom all day and then I have like friends that want to talk and have like, we have like a weekly Zoom call. And I'm like, I look at my wife and I'm like, I can't do this anymore at night. It's like, I can't.
So we're really gracious that you
it's like, yeah, we're still early on my time. It's only 5. So.
Awesome. All right. I think we have time for one last question and we'll turn it to the audience because I've seen a lot of these questions pop up on the chat. So my last question is really just IT related. I mean, in your view, what do you think is the biggest IT challenge you've faced and how did you guys handle it? I mean, we talk about digital and, we talk about transitioning from working from home and things like that. What do you think your biggest IT challenges have been and are?
I think, when I started 4 years ago, I would say that the relationship between IT and my group, which at the time was, I think, more specific, I guess I would describe it as like tenuous. And I find like in a lot of places, just and that was probably for multiple parties.
Right.
And I see it happen a lot in organizations where IT really just takes the brunt of what is not really fair, which is, having, very clear strategies and good clients.
Yeah.
And, they're all, I said half of IT is like keeping people from like hacking and bringing down your organization. And then you have like the rest of, what's left of everything that you have to do the fun things and like build stuff. Yeah. So, when I got into that situation, I'll tell you, I had a very different vision of what we were going to do. This was not an organization, like there was not I would call it digital publishing organization at the AMA. So I, come out of years of being in digital publishing organizations and I'm looking around, I'm like, how much traffic do we have? Don't know. What are the, metrics on membership off of this campaign? Don't know. I came in there and said, like, our job is to build out this platform to engage a wider audience. And at the other end of this thing, I'm going to build out a set of metrics, which in the end came out to be a much bigger audience for our mission initiatives, improvement in the brand equity of this organization and members. And so we created then a funnel to be able to leverage the digital platform to do that. But it required really building, I mean, there was a website, but it was more of like, I was called like an association site, more of a static thing. And my vision was, no, we're going to be a place where physicians trust to come and get resources and news and be entertained and be able to talk to other physicians. And so that meant building, that one of the first things is like our CIO. I said, listen, I know that you're the analytics person is in your group. I really need an analytics team here. And she was like, that's where that person belongs. Editorial was being run out of the marketing group, which is in a separate group at that time. And like, we really need all these things together. It needs a publishing team, and that needs to have a person from IT on it.
Right.
And so we spent, a year mapping out what that new digital platform would look like and how to build those metrics in there, and testing along the way to really create a digital marketing and digital publishing entity. And that was new. Like, people just didn't know what was going to come out of that. But now we're 5 times where we were in terms of traffic.
Right.
And we've proven we know what that funnel looks like for all of those different operations. We're creating massive audiences for the work.
Yeah.
And I think the whole organization now sees the potential of what that looks like. And it's through that partnership that we built with our folks in IT. I'll never forget, I went to, when I first started, there wasn't a landing page. So for membership, and not for for anything else. There was the site, and it was like 5 miles long on every page and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, what happens when somebody,
association page? Yeah,
like, what happens if somebody, honestly, there wasn't like a button either that said like, become a member. So anyway, and if they had clicked on that, where would they go? There's no landing page. And so I'm like, what's happening here? And so I went down and I spoke with somebody in IT, and she said no one had ever asked for that template, for a template. And that person is now like in charge of our web development, and has been the best partner to us because we brought her on as an equal and critical member of our team. And it's been so amazing to see the results and feel like it's a shared responsibility to drive that forward.
That's awesome. So I want to, I still want to thank you for having this conversation. I want to stop talking. I want to give some time for our audience, but I really appreciate our time. And, you really brought us through the journey of how kind of AMA been going through that digital transformation. So it's been awesome. So let me hand it over to thank you again.
Sure.
I'm going to hand it over to David. Dave, I think we have a bunch of questions from the.
Yeah, we do. We've got about 8 or 9 here.
Awesome.
I think I'll start with Anne-Marie Fleming's question. And it's sort of dovetailing off of what you just said a minute ago about membership engagement. How did you get started to understand what your AMA members felt was lacking from the AMA when you joined, Todd, and where does that stand today?
I'll tell you a funny story. Before I started, my announcement was made, and a physician reached out to me on LinkedIn and said that neither he nor anybody in his group were members, and that he felt like we didn't represent them. And so I said, I was feeling very bold at the time, new job. I was like, I'll come see you. And he sent me along with that, sent me like a chapter draft of his book that he was writing. And it was really beautiful, about just how hard it was to be a physician. Like, I was like so excited to meet him and tell him about, what we were doing, and flew to an airport and met him for lunch and sat down, and he handed me chapter 2, which was Why the AMA Must Die. And I was so surprised because I just, I just didn't understand why anyone could feel that strongly. And we spent the lunch talking about things, and I would say in large part, as I listened to kind of the list of things that he felt dissatisfied about, we actually were doing those things, and we were working on those things, and we were in agreement. And so I'm like, wait a minute. And that was just like this huge light went on. I'm like, nobody knows what we're doing. And it just became so evident as I talked to broader and broader audiences that this was the case. And nobody said, here's your job and experience. But I quickly determined that there wasn't one. Like, it literally was, you joined, And maybe if you were in the kind of that small, let's say out of, I mean, there are close to 1.5 million physicians out there. Let's say there are several thousand that are deeply involved in AMA policymaking and that are getting together twice a year. And so if you're in that group, you know what we're doing. But for the average person out there, unless they ran across something, some story in the paper or whatever, we weren't reaching them. And so that is where, we had to create an experience. And that is what the digital platform has become so essential to doing. It's just constant communication and many channels of telling people what's going on with us and what we're doing on their behalf.
Thanks. I have another question from Frank Powers. I'm going to rephrase it just a little bit. Pardon me, Frank. The question is, who is your target market? Doctors, patients, or the public in general, or the combination thereof? I would assume it's primarily doctors, but you've clearly, obviously thought the AMA has such a reputation going back 175 years that you cannot ignore the public at large or patients for that matter.
If you look at the mission, I mean, it's very clear, right? That ultimately it is the betterment of public health, right? And it's a big place, and there are people working on a lot of stuff. My role as Chief Experience Officer is focused on that 1.3, 1.5 million physicians, residents, and medical students. And it's through that group of folks that we primarily then work to improve patient health. Now, there are groups at the AMA that are working directly on programs to affect, for instance, blood pressure, which is just an enormous chronic problem here in the United States. And so there are programs that are kind of directly impacted at public health. But my role as Chief Experience Officer is focused on the physician audience.
Right. Thank you. There's a question from Chris Wiedemann. Which channels have been most effective for communicating AMA's messages and why? And have you versioned messaging by channels significantly?
So I'll say the answer is yes. So I think one of the key things has been the building out across all channels. And there were a lot of misconceptions in place about communication and a lot of under-leveraged communication vehicles. So I would say misconceptions like doctors are not on Facebook. So turns out they are.
Yeah.
They're just communicating with each other and not us. And so in a surprising kind of fashion, social platforms have been essential to our communication plan. But other channels, particularly email, direct mail, digital through our paid, earned, shared, owned channels, with the social channels being extremely important. And the key thing there, you talked about versioning. It is very important because I think one of the key things we learned early in this is that not all physicians are the same. They don't care about the same things, and so there are some that are very interested in advocacy. There are some that are very interested in clinical research. There are some that are more interested in practice improvement. They're different, and if we're talking to them in the same ways with the same channels, well then it's like if you're not interested in fitness, why would I email you about that? So we were able over the course of time to become more sophisticated in understanding segments in the audience, not just by I'm a student, resident, physician. It kind of was this big bucket at the end of that where everybody was in the same bucket. And it's like, well, those folks are not all the same. They're interested in different things. And so let's use these channels differently the things that we communicate to them in those channels are different, because we want to resonate with them. So it's been a lot of learning in that regard, but I don't think anybody probably would have imagined the number of channels that we would be on. We're not yet on TikTok, but we're pretty much everywhere else.
Sure. It sort of begs, how big can you grow the AMA? My assumption was that, anybody who's anybody is already a member. So how do you grow it? But I imagine that's not the case. And then you mentioned international growth before that. What percentage of membership now is international of total membership, and how fast do you think you can grow it? And how widespread is the AMA's reach on that front?
So let me just clear up. I'm not sure where the international thing came from. We are not international at all. We are U.S. based only, and that is the American Medical Association. So that is it there. So our complete audience in regard to, again, my stuff that I work on, I think the number is around 1.3 million medical, physicians, medical students, and residents that are in that physician number. So that's really the upper end of that. And, we're nowhere near, it is not required to be in the American Medical Association. And so, our membership is, it's surpassed the 250,000 point. We're last year we're at our highest level ever. Not ever, I'm saying in a long time, I should say.
Right.
So it's, we had a long way to go, but I just want to, the key thing is we represent every physician and every medical student and their interests, whether they're members or not. And so, again, like no matter what organization you're in and whatever it is that you're trying to get people to join or buy or whatever, that you don't get 100%. For us, the key thing is that we're delivering on what we say. And if we do a good job at that, we will continue to see our membership grow.
On that front, I have a question from Benoit, who says, can you give an example of how you improved the engagement of your members?
I think I would just say that, our digital platform is probably the great example of that. When I started here, I'd say we were, when you look at who's visiting the site and what % of physicians are you reaching, we're almost triple where we were. So that's a lot more penetration in terms of like just having a regular relationship with someone. The other thing is like just, we built a new campaign when I came in called Members Move Medicine. And sounds like a small thing, but it's an idea that grew out of an interaction with, like, we have sections, like groups of people in there, young physicians was with this one section. I was talking to the leader of that, and she said, we would really like you to actually use physicians in your materials and not stock photographs. And I was like, that sounds like a good idea. And if you can believe it, it's hard to do this. And I started kind of an experiment. I had met a photographer here in Chicago who was kind of like a celebrity photographer, and we started photographing physicians and medical school students. And we started to use those in all our materials. And just, any chance that we got, any kind of big meeting, conference we had, we would just create like an assembly line kind of thing where we just brought people in, and we created a look that I was going for, which was, these people are heroes and we should make them look like that. And it was one of those things that kind of grew way past whatever I thought it was going to be, and started to have an impact on how people perceive this organization and perceive themselves. And it became an outgrowth of that idea of helping people feel powerful. And I'll never forget, we had a medical school student. She's now a resident at this point, but she had her kind of photo session. And she went over to the table and started kind of looking at the things as they were going across on the computer. And she said, I've never felt as powerful as I do when I look at these photos.
Who was the photographer?
It's a guy named Jeff Shear here in Chicago. He still works with us. We still have our campaign. We've been sad not to keep shooting photos of people over the past year. It's been a loss, because I'll tell you, there was I'll never forget, like we have these big annual meetings, and we have like 2,000 physicians, medical students come, and we had those photographs blown up 20 feet long on banners, people in this big house of delegates. You've never seen, like, it just was so different. And I walked into one of these meetings, and a young woman in a hijab asked me if, I was the person that ran marketing, and I said yes. And she said, I just want you to know that when we got your the direct mail piece, it featured a young woman in a hijab who was, I think, a medical student or a resident at the time. She said, I opened it up. I was with my mom. We'd never seen a woman in a hijab ever in anything, any marketing materials of any kind. And we broke out in tears when we saw this, and I joined. And I was like, that must be, first, the only piece of direct mail that ever made anyone cry, and B, like, that's what it's all about. That's engagement. And that's changing people's minds. So cool.
That is cool.
Scientific marketing word. Cool.
Not used enough. Well, I'll get to one more, maybe two. Working out, this is sort of a combination of questions. Working with associations and this is from Thomas Vasquez. Working with associations and member organizations present specific challenges. I'm going to add a little blurb here, particularly when they're experiencing rapid growth. Can you speak to some of these specific challenges that confront associations and membership organizations like the AMA? And has your growth presented any sort of stumbling blocks or obstacles that have maybe weakened the foundation? Or how would you, with rapid growth comes challenges and problems. How would you address that?
Yeah, we're not a startup in a garage or anything like that. This place has been around for 175 years. So there is a foundation for this. And there's rapid change. And I think that, that just requires great leadership and visionary leadership, which we have both, at the executive level and at the board level. And so for a role like mine, I'll speak to that kind of directly. Like, they saw that there was a need to engage members and the physician audience in a new way. And that skill set and that infrastructure wasn't there. And they looked for someone, they picked somebody that came from horse racing, which is very different, right? But had the digital experience and a very different vision of how it could work. And then they supported that operation to be able to do that. And the changes that drove, right? It does create like a lot of we weren't doing that before. Now you're asking me to do this, and that does, it creates those moments of imbalance and uncertainty. How's this work? I don't know what this person wants. I think the greatest thing is that I look over the past 4 years is that the digital platform and the work that we do has been a unifying force for the organization. And before, we used to look at like a lot of separate things were more separate. And what the platform has come in and said, like, here, we have a kind of a diagram, internal we use for strategy that shows kind of the work that's going on, and how communication feeds into that is just so critical. Whereas someone would have said before, membership's that thing that operates over there. That's what those people do. The model that we have now is very different, and it says, if we work on the right things and we tell the right people about that and we communicate effectively, membership's it's an output of that. And like all the metrics, our brand strength, everything comes out of doing a great job. I'm not here to like, I'm only here to help you. And I think that's where, you know, people in an association where there's membership and their mission, you know, maybe they used to be here, now they're here, right? That's that's the potential. And that is what a digital platform, I think, can really bring to the table.
I like what you said up front about you came in with a racing background. You did have the digital acumen, which was vital, but I think it's fantastic that they would hire someone with your background because, you know, I remember, you would probably remember from your days at, I think, was it Leo Burnett or who were you with?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, in like, well, does this person have experience in, you know, consumer packaged goods or specifically Pampers, or does this person have, you know, sometimes you just want somebody from a different walk of life altogether who can bring in an entirely fresh perspective. And I think, you know, they did right, and you were great to join them.
Yeah, I learned that at P&G. They were kind of like, you know, one day you're working on mouthwash, the next you're on an antiperspirant, then you're working on Metamucil. It's like, you think like, oh, there's all this specific knowledge for the context. You can learn that really fast.
Yeah.
But what you can't learn is how to be a marketer unless you have that kind of breadth of experiences to be able to do that.
Good. We'll take one more question. I'm not going to ask the question. If anybody has another question, please put yourself off of mute and you can ask that question to Todd directly. And if anybody's too shy, looks like Anna Marie just unmuted herself, but I can't tell.
Well, I did put a question in the chat, and I would just love to understand how you work collaboratively with your fellow leaders within the AMA, because it seems like you were a force for change. And I can imagine sometimes that creates friction. Like, how did you bring everybody to the table to come up with collaborative solutions? I heard what you said about you being a unifying force, but how did you actually make that happen?
It is a really great question. And you know, to be honest, like a lot of people, you know, when I arrived 4 years ago, maybe you would talk to someone in some of our mission areas and they're like, that's your thing, membership. And I'm focused on this huge thing. And so, you know, don't bother me. So the biggest thing that happened, I think, in the early time there is I did find kind of a partner. This particular person runs a group, and they focus on physician wellness. As you might know, burnout is a serious problem among physicians, and the pandemic did not help that at all. And he was game to be an early adopter. And so we began to lay out the strategy for what that would look like. And, you know, we began looking around, and this is a great example of where, like, if you typed in the words physician burnout into Google, we were nowhere to be found. A year later, we're on the first page. And that comes from, you know, basically we learned together about what constitutes the kind of content that we were going to need to produce and how our teams were going to work together to operationalize that. And the melding of a reporting team and a subject matter expert team. Let me tell you, like, it's not always smooth. And there are multiple parts of that particular team that we kind of expanded the model to, but it really was a pilot. And I think once people saw, at that time, we wrote like the largest article ever in AMA history in terms of views was an article about physician burnout. It was like, which medical specialty has the top 10 specialties for physician burnout or something like that, which is like a classic publishing thing that you would do, but never had been done before. And we were like, oh my goodness, we can really build audience around this important thing. And through that, engage with the resources that they were building on how to make systemic changes that would improve this particular thing. And so that became kind of a pilot. And what's great about, again, digital media is you see the results. And so then we kind of started to roll that out across multiple people. And in our redesign, which happened really 2 years after I started, it really started to partner very closely with all these different groups to make sure that this amplification channel that, turned an operation that was really about kind of more static into a content marketing organization designed to expand the audience. That's something everybody got on board with, and they saw the results, and it was great.
Thanks. One last question from SS. I think that might be Steven Steers, but I'm not sure. Can you talk about any SEO techniques used to get on the first page search results?
So for anybody that's like in the content business, so to speak, it's not one thing, it's a lot of things. You have two customers out there. One of them is your audience and what they're looking for, and the second is Google. And so most people, people who don't know a lot about this don't understand that you have those two folks both need to be optimized. And so for us, it began being scientific about understanding what people were looking for in every one of those areas. And so, if you're used to content marketing, you pretty quickly determine, like, what are those areas in physician wellness? What are those keywords that are being searched? Who's ranking for those keywords? What are they doing? And you build content toward that. So you build toward the demand. You can't make it up. So it's scientific, and there are goals that are set on where you want to be in those positions. Then there's the other part, is like an infrastructure. It's the part that nobody sees, and it's called, build your site so that it can be crawled. And you need to have everything has to be properly done in terms of the publishing. So from the architecture of it to the tagging and indexing and everything, it just wasn't there before. So we weren't, there were structural reasons we weren't being ranked, and then there were actual production reasons we weren't being ranked. And then, people have been in SEO for a long time, like many, not tricks, but skills you need to be able to do that. So SEO is like a constant thing for us, constantly evolving. The rules always changing. But what we found now is that we build the right kind of content, and we have a site that does what it needs to infrastructurally, and we have a terrific production team that implements it properly, that you can really optimize that.
Still having fun.
It's blast. I know. I'm saying.
To be at the AMA now, especially in the last year, what a challenge! What an opportunity! Yeah,
it's. Listen, I didn't take the job because I was like, I love healthcare, or I love digital media. I love marketing. And I love that sense of seeing your work make a difference. And so to me, when I talk to physicians out there, you see, they think of us differently. They interact with our work. It changes stuff. That is very meaningful.
That's great. Hey, look at that. It's 6:40. Time flies when you're having fun. Todd, thank you so much for joining us today, this evening. Arwen, thank you again also for being our moderator. Great job, both you guys. Thanks to our audience for tuning in and asking some very good questions. We didn't get to all of them, but I think we got to most of them. We will be eventually posting this on YouTube, so you can all go back and refer to it. You can connect with Todd on LinkedIn, So you can approach him directly. I hope I'm okay in saying that, Todd.
Please, please link in with me.
On your,
I'm very active on LinkedIn. If you,
I noticed.
if you know.
But anybody who wants to stay on here, we'll stay on till about 6:45, which is for 5 more minutes. Todd, it's up to you. If you can take a couple more questions, fine. If anybody wants to chime in and say anything, any last words or comments or questions for Todd or any of us, please feel free to do so. And clock starting, you got 5 minutes.
Thanks again, Todd.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Big applause. Let's see.
I think there's a question that someone just sent and says, I don't know if they want to ask themselves, but the question is, do you collaborate with the ANA?
We have this year especially. You see a lot of joint releases from the ANA and the American Hospital Association also. And I think that's been a pretty powerful combination. Speaking out for science, speaking out for the needs of the healthcare teams, trying to get people vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you collaborate with anyone like your peers like internationally, or do they have like an AMA kind of abroad?
There is something called the World Health Organization.
Right.
And that entity is I mean, what did I just say? The World Medical Association.
Oh,
Not the World Health Organization. Here we go. Edit that out. No, I'm sorry. So there is the World Health Organization, but separately, what I meant to say was there is the World Medical Association. And so that is an international group of which the U.S. is one representative, and it happens to be one of our past presidents is now leading that, and has been for the past year. And so we are active in that regard, and they have their own kind of policy making, but it is separate from what the AMA does.
Got it.
Right. How about some of the other groups? Like, to what extent do you collaborate with the American Lung Association or the American Society of Anesthesiologists, who are also out in they're out in Schaumburg, not too far from you, I guess.
So there's a different, I guess those are different kinds of organizations. And so, like I know my counterpart at the American Lung Association is Julia Fitzgerald, is just like terrific. And then there are called the specialties. And so when you think about AMA, there is what they call the House of Medicine, or the House of Delegates, is represented in that by every state and specialty society. And so that is kind of, ultimately the governing body from which all policy emanates, is that House of Delegates. And so that is where representatives from all of those specialties participate closely in what the AMA does. And so there is great coordination there on what we'd call like the federation of state and medical societies.
Actually, I communicated earlier this week with Julia, and she was very excited about being here. And she was using a code name. I don't think she was able to join. So I'll have to mention what you said, and I'll make sure she gets a copy of this as well.
I must have had like a premonition about her being here.
Yeah.
Or not to say her name. So I'm just kidding.
She's supposed to be here. I don't know. Things happen. But let's see.
Can I ask you a quick question? With the
Chris.
I thought this is really interesting conversation, and you talked about the diversity of your audience, from medical students to residents to doctors. There's also the diversity amongst the different disciplines. The experience, a dermatologist has is very different from the experience a surgeon has. So my question to you is, what level did you deal with personalization in order to engage your audience?
So that is an excellent question. We have found that, at least for the work that I do, that interest, and particularly in content, trumps specialty and age. And so I can't and don't, a specialty society is going to do a better job on the particulars of, the research for that particular group, and speak directly on that than ever I could. And so I am on I'm in a different place. So if somebody wants, when we're talking about advocacy, we're talking about federal advocacy and even state advocacy issues. And when we're talking about research, I fortunately have the privilege of having, one of the preeminent medical journals in the world, the Journal of the American Medical Association, as part of our organization, and can draw off that to a wide variety of specialties. And then in terms of practice management, development, things like that, we have very deep activity going on in general areas like telemedicine, physician burnout, things like that. And so those are the areas that we tend to be more personalized on. And so I'm not really looking to do dermatology specific things, so to speak. Does that make sense, Chris?
Good. We'll take one more question from the audience, and then we'll go our merry ways. Any last questions for Todd? You're off the hook, Todd.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure. It's really fun. You can tell I really like talking about this. So it's always
the word passion comes to mind.
All right.
Obviously very passionate about this job. And I think this was a wonderful session today. Again, thanks to you. Thanks to all the participants who joined us today. Thanks to Arwen, Deepak, and Bruno, my colleagues at BTGNY. If you're not, well, I guess you are members now because you had to sign up to get here, but thank you so much. All of you for being here. And again, Todd, we'll be in touch.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Todd.
Bye, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Take
Take
care,
care.
everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great evening and
Bye-bye.
a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.